Martin Van Huladunyas Falcha. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Justice Subcommittee on Policing. This is our second meeting of 2021, and we have no apologies. Agenda item 1 is a decision to take items 3, 4 and 5 in private. Are we all agreed? Members disagree, perhaps they could indicate to me or use the chat. We are agreed about that. Thank you. Our main item of business today is an evidence session on the Scottish Government's response to Dame Eilish Angelini's final report on the independent review of complaints handling, investigations and misconduct issues in relation to policing. I refer members to paper 1, which is a note by the clerk, and paper 2, which is a private paper. And I welcome the witnesses to today's meeting: Hamza Youssef, Cabinet Secretary for Justice; Neil Hastie, Head of Community Safety Unit; and Anita Popplestone, Head of Police Complaints and Scrutiny Unit at the Scottish Government. And I invite you, Cabinet Secretary, to make some short opening remarks, please.
Good morning, Convener. Good morning to all subcommittee members. I hope you're all doing well, keeping well and keeping safe. Thank you for the invitation, Convener. Both the Lord Advocate and I are extremely grateful to Dame Eilish Angelini for the significant work that he has undertaken to produce such a wide-ranging and forensic report of police complaints and the handling of police complaints. Our thanks also to the individuals, the organisations who gave evidence, and the often forgotten, but they work hard, the Secretariat that was provided to Dame Eilish Angelini for the work that they did in relation to the report and the analysis too. As outlined in our joint response, working with partners, we intend to accept the vast majority of Dame Eilish's recommendations, many as specifically set out with the scope to explore options where other routes or mechanisms may achieve the desired outcome. Convener, as I'm sure the committee will agree, it is important that confidence in the police remains high. I greatly value the work of Scotland's police officers and staff in keeping communities safe, and as a critical part of our public health response to the challenges of the pandemic. However, it is essential that when things go wrong, the police are held to account, lessons are learned and improvements are made. The Lord Advocate and I remain confident that the systems for the handling of police complaints, investigations and misconduct are fundamentally sound. Nonetheless, we agree with Dame Eilish that reform of certain aspects is absolutely needed. Her final report provides a broad suite of recommendations that will provide a strong platform from which to derive meaningful improvement. Convener, I do not underestimate the scale of the task ahead, but I'm committed to delivering these improvements in partnership, building on successful improvement work already undertaken since publication of the preliminary report in June 2019. I commend the significant steps taken by Police Scotland, the SPA, the PERC, Crown Office, and indeed by government. Each of the partner organisations is putting in place important measures on which to build progress towards implementation. In particular, I welcome the strong statement and swift action from the Chief Constable and the SPA in condemning discrimination and reinforcing the importance of diversity and inclusion within policing. Given the complexity and breadth of the review, we're putting clear structures in place to oversee, to coordinate and report on progress. These in no way cut across or replace existing governance and accountability arrangements, but will provide assurance to both myself and the Lord Advocate on delivery. I recognise the importance of transparency. I'm committed to sharing information on progress in a way that is meaningful and accessible to a range of audience. A list of all 111 recommendations, that's the final report and preliminary report, with a simple box to be ticked on completion, will not give an accurate picture of the work underway. Progress is far more nuanced than a binary tick box can convey. Instead, progress will be reported under thematic headings to provide an overall picture of developments. Work streams not dependent on legislation are already very much underway, pressing ahead where there's a clear agreement on the options to be delivered and committing on working through options where further discussion and consideration from partners is required. We will be bringing forward comprehensive primary legislation to cover the necessary legislative changes in a single instrument where possible, supported by secondary legislation where necessary to avoid a piecemeal approach. Convener, I recognise the development and scrutiny of legislation will take time, requiring consultation and, of course, subject to the outcome of the Scottish parliamentary elections in a few months' time. In taking forward the work, I am committed to adopting a collaborative and inclusive approach to engagement with the whole policing community. I recognise the key role that staff associations will play in that regard. As we move forward to progress implementation, working closely with partners to determine the next steps will be vital. Building on the progress of recent times, we're confident that the resulting improvements will help to strengthen public confidence in policing in Scotland. I thank once again Dame Eilish Angelini and all those involved in helping her to produce her report, and I look forward to discussing all the report, its recommendations, and the wider issue of police complaints and handling with the committee this morning.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Cabinet Secretary, and of course the subcommittee too would like to thank Dame Eilish, her team, the witnesses, indeed all those who have provided written evidence to the subcommittee on this important matter. Before we move to questions, can I remind members the usual reminder, please, to indicate who the question is for, and remind all attendees to wait just a moment for your microphone to be activated before speaking. And we'll move to questions, and I have the first couple, if I may, Cabinet Secretary. And you talked about Dame Eilish's work being wide-ranging and forensic. It was always acknowledged the task undertaken by Dame Eilish would be significant. But I wonder, were you surprised by the breadth and scope of the final report and indeed the recommendations?
I think anybody Dame Eilish Angelini, as I have done over the years, would not be surprised that she's done a thorough job. We certainly expected her to do a thorough job. In fact, her preliminary report was perhaps an indication of just how thorough her final report would be. But it would also be true to say, Convener, that some of the recommendations
we appear to have lost you a wee bit there, Cabinet Secretary. Well, hang on in. Are you back with us?
Me, and I think some of those in the policing family as well. So not surprised by the breadth of that report, but yes, it's a piece of work that has been thoroughly been done by Dame Eilish.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. You're possibly aware, Cabinet Secretary, I think you're with us in audio only. I think there was a little challenge with the quality of sound in your middle of your response there. So if I can move us on, again, in your opening remarks, you talked about it not being a tick box approach. And your joint response with the Crown Office, you've chosen the thematic approach to dealing with the recommendations. Can you explain the rationale for that a bit further, please?
So, Convener, can I just double check that you're hearing me okay? I think I maybe got lost halfway through that answer.
Cabinet Secretary, you're coming through loud and clear, audio only, with Mr McGregor on screen at the moment. Yes, please continue, Cabinet Secretary. Okay,
I will continue, and I think I got the gist of your question. I could hear you fine. If I do cut off, just to say, Convener, I do have another device on standby, so if I disconnect again, I'm happy to switch devices. I think you were asking me, and again, you can just interrupt me and tell me I was wrong. I got the gist of your question, which I think was around the approach we've taken to the recommendations in terms of it being a thematic approach.
Indeed. Why thematic? I picked up your comments about not a tick box binary option, but why that particular approach, please?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, we thought it would be the most sensible approach because, we could have gone through each recommendation in a sequential order, but I don't think that would have been right because, a number of the recommendations are going to require legislation. So what would be the most rational way of approaching so many recommendations? There's 111, as I say, between both the preliminary and the final report, and grouping them into very obvious themes which all the partners could agree on seemed to be the most logical way to take this forward. I think that's not the only way we'll approach this. Although we have the themes, what we're also doing as partners, looking at what recommendations don't require legislation and we all agree on, so we can move on those relatively quickly. What does require legislation, but there is agreement, so we can put them into a grouping. What doesn't require legislation but needs further discussion, so there's not agreement, and we'll need to consider those. And then Probably the most difficult category, I mean difficult in terms of how much time it will probably take, is where there's no unanimous agreement, and yet those recommendations require legislation. And I think those are the ones that are going to take time to work through. But the thematic approach, and again, I'd be interested in committees' thoughts on this, of course, subcommittees' thoughts on this, of course, that to me seem like the most sensible way to approach what were quite a wide-ranging and quite numerous recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary, and some of these will be probed in detail by members. And our next series of questions come from the Deputy Convener, Margaret Mitchell. Margaret, please.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. The review was published on the 11th of November 2020. Given the significance and importance of this report, why was there no ministerial statement when the review was published, Cabinet Secretary?
So I know this was mentioned during the Conservative Party debate, and your colleague Liam Kerr was good enough to correct the record, because he suggested that when the interim report was published that there was a ministerial statement. At that time there wasn't. Of course, I attended the committee. In fact, it may have been this committee that I attended. Forgive me, I can't remember if it was this committee or Justice Committee. I think it was this committee I attended on the back of the preliminary report. But if it wasn't, it was perhaps the full Justice Committee. So there wasn't a ministerial statement then. It was right and proper, I think, to give committee members the opportunity to scrutinise the government's response. And the government's response was always going to take a bit of time. If you expected a ministerial statement, a week after the publication of a report that had 81 recommendations and was over 500 pages long, I think that is, in the midst, of course, of a global pandemic, I think that would have been unreasonable. So I thought it was always sensible that we discuss with stakeholders our intentions, that we produce a joint response, that I appear in front of a committee to then be grilled and interrogated on that response, as will happen, I'm certain, this morning. And then, of course, if members wish to have a further ministerial statement, I'm happy to make myself available. That would be for the Bureau to decide. But I see no difficulty in the approach of being interrogated by the committee in the first instance.
Just unusual, a report of this significance wasn't the subject of a ministerial report as soon as the full findings were known. The Crown Procurator's Fiscal Service is one of the key stakeholders in investigating police complaints. With hindsight, do you consider it may have been better for the Scottish Government alone to have set the remit for the review and to have issued its own response rather than having done so jointly with the Lord Advocate?
I'm happy to reflect on that one, Deputy Convener, but I don't think so. I mean, there is an understanding that when this report was commissioned, before my time, but was commissioned by my predecessor, it was done so with the Lord Advocate, because so many of the recommendations would understandably touch upon the ministerial remit of the Lord Advocate, and he is a minister in the government, and the ministerial remit of the Cabinet Secretary for Justice. So I think it made sense. So happy to reflect upon that. I don't think there's anything in our response, the joint response from myself and Lord Advocate, that would give any rise to any concerns. But again, if committee members feel that there is something in there, then I'm happy to give that reflection. If there's any future discussions, debates or responses, if you feel that they be better coming separately from myself and Lord Advocate, something, as I say, I'm prepared to consider.
In this joint response, you state that you intend to accept the majority of Dame Eilish's recommendations. Many are specifically set out, but with scope to explore options where other routes or mechanisms may achieve the desired outcome. Would you just confirm that whatever approach is taken, that all of the recommendations which have been put forward will be realised?
So I suppose the reason why I couldn't do that is because some of the recommendations are very firmly into the operational space of the Chief Constable, or very firmly into the operational space of the Park. And so you would be asking me to interfere into the operational independence of the Chief Constable and interfere into the operational independence of the Park. For example, if I was to give you just one recommendation, which the Park has said that she does not think should be progressed. That was Dame Eilish's recommendation around regional offices, and she's given her reasons for why she thinks that's probably not needed. But if you are suggesting to me, which I'm not sure you are, but if you were suggesting to me that government should accept unanimously or unilaterally, sorry, all of the recommendations, then I would be overriding the operational independence of the park, which is not good for the complaints handling system. If I was to do that, in fact, we've had allegations of cabinet secretaries interfering, I should say, allegations we reject and refute into the complaints handling process. So we know that this is an area where ministers and cabinet secretaries should respect the operational boundaries of the park. In terms of the broader question, I've said, and the Lord Advocate and I have said in our joint response that yes, we, as a broad thrust of the direction of travel in which Dame Eilish is taking us, yes, we absolutely want to get there. We will accept the vast majority of the recommendations, but we just reserve a right to, one, allow operational partners to make decisions that are for them, but also importantly, if there is another way of realising those recommendations, then there may be an alternative route or mechanism. But I think the broad direction of travel that Dame Eilish is taking us in, more independence in the process, greater transparency in the process, these are all recommendations that I wholeheartedly accept.
Dame Eilish has made a total of 111 recommendations. Are there any particular recommendations you feel should be given absolute priority?
Yes, I explained in my opening remarks, or sorry, my opening answer to the convener, that where we can move on recommendations that don't require legislation and have universal agreement across all partners, then I think we should just get on with it and move. And there is progress being made in that regard, and it has been made. I was also quite struck, and I suspect a number of members in the committee were as well, quite struck by the recommendations around diversity and inclusion. I thought that made for quite stark and worrying reading, and therefore I think in terms of public confidence, any priority that can be given to those recommendations, and I commend the Chief Constable and the SPA for their quick and decisive action in this regard, but any priority that can be given to that, of those recommendations, I think are hugely important. And I suppose the third bracket for me, this is about having a process that obviously is effective, but clearly also commands public confidence. So where we can take forward those recommendations that will have the greatest impact on public confidence, I think we should be prioritising those two.
Okay, thank you for that response, Cabinet Secretary. The joint response concludes, there are and always will be opportunities to improve the complaints handling and investigation progress. We are confident that we have a good system for the handling of police complaints, investigations and misconduct, but our aim is to have the gold standard. This appears to be a very complacent conclusion, given the review established the current system is not fit for purpose and that the necessary checks and balances are not in place to inspire public confidence and to protect the police from malicious or vexatious complaints. Given this, obviously, the governance and accountability recommendations are particularly important, and Dame Eilish has specifically recommended that the relevant legislation should be amended to redesignate the PIRC as a commission, comprising of one police investigations and review commissioner and two deputy commissioners, one who should be legally qualified, to create a statutory board and to provide the Commissioner be appointed by the Queen on the nomination of Parliament, not ministers, and be accountable to Parliament. Will you confirm, Cabinet Secretary, that the Scottish Government considers that these are crucial recommendations as set out in the review and should be implemented in full?
So I would disagree with your characterisation of complacency. I don't think anybody could read the Lord Advocates and my joint response and come to that conclusion. If you turn to page 11 of our joint response at the top of page 11, where we have the subheading wider powers for Park. I'll just quote directly that we say we welcome the recommendations that have been made by Dame Eilish to increase the current powers of the Park, recognising Park has the people, the skills and the values of integrity, impartiality and respect. Neither we nor Dame Eilish believe the Park is toothless, but we recognise the report has identified where the role of the Park could be further enhanced. As mentioned, we view these recommendations favourably and will consider with the Commissioner and other partners the proposals put forward for enhancing the role of the Park by providing additional statutory powers. So, the response I think is pretty clear. Yes, we definitely believe in beefing up the Park. We think we'd want to do that, understandably, I'd hope, in consultation with the Park and other partners, and indeed with Parliament, because I think it's important to bring them in, as well as staff associations like the Police Federation and other staff associations. But yes, to answer your question, long and short, I think the Park should be beefed up. We'll want to understand the legislative consequences of that. We'll want to take into account the Park's own views. And I think if you speak to the Park, certainly when I have spoke to the Commissioner, she has some reservations about directly being accountable to Parliament, because she believes that there shouldn't be any political interference in her role whatsoever. But that would be something that you would have to discuss with the Park. So we'll need to work out a couple of or work through a couple of the recommendations. But all in all, a beefed up Park is clearly what Dame Eilish Angelini has recommended, and it will happen.
Thank you for that response, Cabinet Secretary. It only remains for me to say that a beefed up Park doesn't fill me with total confidence, and I would have hoped for a commitment for the specific recommendations I read out to be approved. But that concludes my questions, Convener.
Hello there. Now, I think connection may have crashed there. Hopefully I'm being heard. You're on screen.
I can hear you, Convener, but you are breaking up.
I think you want to watching in June. With the Cabinet Secretaries.
Hi, this is Diane, the clerk to the committee. Margaret, would you be able to suspend the meeting for a few minutes until we can check the convener's connection, please?
Yes, could I ask that the broadcast suspend and we'll reconvene in 5 to 10 minutes?
Hello and welcome back to the Justice Subcommittee on Policing. I'm sorry we've had some technical difficulties. There seem to be at my end. The Deputy Convener is ready to step in if the connection fails again, and I'm grateful to Parking and Broadcasting colleagues for trying to keep us on stream here. So at the point where we cut out, we were going to take the next series of questions from Rona Mackay. Rona, please.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Cabinet Secretary, you've given a commitment to publish progress against the recommendations. This transparent approach is very welcome. How will stakeholders and the public be made aware of those recommendations which have not been accepted by the Scottish Government and Justice partners?
I suppose put it simply, when we do publish the progress that we've made, what I intend to ensure we do is that we include information about recommendations which are not being taken forward, and to give a description of the rationale and reasons why. Because I do think that's important. I do think there are some recommendations that, you know, as I say, we can possibly recognise or realise the outcomes through a potentially different route than Dame Eilish Angelini has requested. And when you have 81 recommendations, or 111 actually, if you take both reports together, there'll be some recommendations that perhaps have either been overtaken by events, or indeed partners think there's a better way to deliver again those outcomes. But I do think it's important, to answer your question, to give a reason for why certain recommendations may not be fully realised, and I intend to do that as part of the reporting process.
Thank you for that answer. If I could move on with my second question, and that's something you referred to in your earlier answer to the Deputy Convener about equality and diversity and inclusion. And in the final report, as you know, Dame Eilish raised some serious concerns with regard to discriminatory attitudes and behaviours within Police Scotland, and recommended that an independent review on equality matters should be established. Could you comment on these observations that she's made, and outline what work has been going on and what will be undertaken to address these issues going forward?
Well, I think, like everybody, I found them to be quite stark, quite difficult to read as well. I have family members who are in Police Scotland. They are from ethnic minority backgrounds. I speak often to the Scottish Police Muslim Association, to SEMPER Scotland, who represent ethnic minority police officers, and they have at times raised with me concerns around a variety of matters, and I know they've raised them also directly with the Chief Constable, and I've also raised them then with the Chief Constable, but nothing quite to the level of what we read in Dame Eilish's report. So we've got to, first of all, acknowledge that it's for Police Scotland to take forward that recommendation as very much an operational matter, but clearly all of us have an interest in ensuring that Police Scotland rids itself of any discrimination, whether that's structural, whether that's overt, of course, whether that's even unconscious bias that exists. And I've been heartened by the response, not just of the Chief Constable and the SPA, which was swift and decisive, but also of the staff associations, the LGBTI organisation, the Scottish Women's Development Forum, SEMPER Scotland, as I mentioned already, and a number of the others who have pledged to work with Police Scotland to realise that outcome. So I think an independent, we must stress that word, an independent external review of these matters, I think, is absolutely imperative. And I know DCC Fiona Taylor is taking forward that work, and she's in good discussions with the likes of Jill Imrie, HMICS, on this issue. And again, Police Scotland could obviously update you on the detail of how that progress is going. But no, I do think this is an area that has to be prioritised.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That's me, Convener. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Rona. Our next questions come from Liam MacArthur. Liam, please.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Just following up Rona Mackay's question there, as you say, Cabinet Secretary, the findings of Dame Eilish's report were indeed dark. I think they may have gone beyond what most people would have expected. And while responsibility for taking forward the recommendations at an operational level may very well fall to Police Scotland, but in your discussions with Police Scotland, do you feel there is a recognition of the extent of the issues that exist within the force, not just at the most senior level, but throughout the organisation, from discussions perhaps with the Scottish Police Federation, as well as the other bodies that you've referred to?
Well, it's a tricky question, because I think from the senior leadership that I talk to, without a shadow of a doubt, from the Chief Constable and the DCCs that I speak to on a weekly basis, there's absolutely a recognition that they have to take action and as I say, appoint somebody independent to externally go through Police Scotland's Police Scotland and indeed their structures in place around discrimination, etc., etc. I think they have to, that has to be done, and there's an acceptance that has to be done. There's an acceptance by the Chief Constable and the senior leaders, again at a kind of DCC level that I speak to regularly, that they have to listen to the lived experiences of their rank and file officers who are coming forward with these with these concerns. I could not say with certainty that that is being understood in its fullest by everybody, because of course I don't speak to all of the ranks within Police Scotland perhaps as regularly as I do with the senior leadership. I think for the Federation you would have to speak to Callum Steele and David Hamilton about their understanding of those recommendations, and what their feelings are of those recommendations. Similarly, when I speak to Semper Scotland, who I have, again, who represent ethnic minority officers, they are not surprised by the recommendation. So, look, I think it's really important for whatever part of the policing family you belong to, that you should listen to the lived experiences of the officers that have come forward. But I do think anybody who has any doubt about the problem and maybe the extent of the challenge really needs to focus on those who are speaking to their lived experience and not be dismissive of that.
Thanks, Cabinet Secretary. If I could move you on to the issue of the gross misconduct procedures and indeed conduct processes. You said in your response that you propose full consideration be given to a range of options to improve the gross misconduct procedures, but also the transparency of conduct processes. I wonder if you could maybe set out in a bit more detail what those options are and how you see them improving on what is currently in place at the present time.
Yeah, again, for me, this is a really important area because public confidence is key, and again, it would be foolish of me to suggest that the events which led up to this review taking place, they would have had an impact on public confidence. So for me, that is hugely important. I suppose I try to think about it from instead of just focusing on the policy level, which of course is important. From an individual perspective, if you have a complaint that you wish to raise with Police Scotland, well, how would you go about doing that? The chances are you'd probably go on your computer, you'd probably Google Police Scotland complaints, and you would probably be directed to either Police Scotland's website or potentially the PIRC's website is the top kind of two websites to go, and that work is already underway. It's one of the recommendations makes up a number of recommendations actually from Dame Eilish, where Police Scotland should improve their website, enhance their public engagement and messaging. That's in the final report, recommendations 48 and 49. So Police Scotland have done that. They're in the process of updating their website to make it clearer that a member of the public can take a complaint how to make a complaint. But PIRC are also doing that. They're updating their website to make it clear that a member of the public can also take a complaint to the Ombudsman if they're not satisfied with PIRC's involvement. So, I think sometimes when it comes to public confidence, we can get lost in some of the policy analysis, which again is important, but actually doing some of the more simple things which can be done right now that actually will make a big difference to the public's knowledge of police complaints, I think should be given priority, and I'm pleased that are being done.
Thank you, and obviously that that interaction through improved websites can make a difference, but substantive changes have also been proposed as a recommendation to introduce independent legally qualified chairpersons, for example, appointed by the Lord President to consider gross misconduct hearings for all ranks. And I wondered whether you agreed with that proposal and would be looking to take that forward with the relevant bodies.
Yeah, on gross misconduct, I think, again, these are areas that we are supportive of what's been suggested. Again, when I talk about different avenues that can be taken, there may be other avenues than just legislative change where we can realise some of these avenues. But yes, in general and broadly, I think for gross misconduct, particularly that involves senior officers, the bulk of the recommendations from Damien Eilish-Angelini, I can see us taking forward without much need for too much discussion between partners, and obviously there'll need to be consultation with this legislation. There are a few I'd like to delve into deeper with operational partners to understand that there's not going to be any unintended adverse consequences, and that it wouldn't have an impact, say, on the integrity of the process. There's nothing that kind of rings alarm bells with me immediately. So on the gross misconduct recommendations, I suppose, again, the long and short answer would be yes. I think the vast bulk of Damien Eilish's recommendations will be pursued, if not all of them.
Thanks a lot. Just very briefly, Convener, just to be clear, Cabinet Secretary, the proposal for independent legally qualified chairpersons, that's not one of the issues that you want to explore further, just in case there may be some unintended consequences or implications. That's one that you demerit and will be looking to take forward in relation to gross misconduct hearings.
Yeah, again, that particular recommendation isn't one that sets off any immediate alarm bells. But I should say, with all of the recommendations that we think might require legislation, we would obviously do a consultation, just as we do with any piece of legislation. So that's not a suggestion that we don't think there's merit in it, that simply we'd like to get the views of the public on that too. But no, that's not a recommendation that rings immediate alarm bells.
Okay, thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you, Liam. Cabinet Secretary, a couple of fairly short questions from myself, if I may, please. You've stated that many of the recommendations will require a legislative solution, and it's your intention to bring forward a single bill. Can you outline why that's a single bill is the vehicle that you would use? And have you given any thought, acknowledging electoral process, have you given any thought to the time frame of that, please?
Yeah, there are some recommendations that would require legislation that partners could agree on. I mean, almost immediately, and I can understand why some people then might say, "Well, sure, you should bring those forward." But as the committee knows only too well, there is a lot of work that goes into legislation, as well as there is a lot of parliamentary time that we need to go into legislative scrutiny. We have had a huge impact on legislation and the legislative timetable in the last 12 months, obviously to do with the pandemic. None of us knows what the next session of Parliament is going to look like in terms of the bills that need to be caught up. So then to introduce 3 or 4 bills in a kind of piecemeal fashion, with all of the work that entails from a government perspective, in terms of consultation, drafting legislation, from a parliamentary perspective, in terms of the scrutiny of that legislation, to do that, to me, would make little sense. So I think it does make sense to have one legislative vehicle to do that. That being said, I'm also exploring where the government's already committed to bring forward legislation, and can we perhaps realise some of the recommendations through that. So, for example, Damien Eilish's recommendation around legal assistance for the families involved in an FAI. You may know the Minister for Community Safety has already committed to introducing, I guess, again, depending on election results, committed to introducing a legal aid bill. So could that fit in the legal aid bill? Because if there's broad agreement on that, as opposed to wait for a recommendation timescales, I'm afraid I couldn't commit because of all the reasons I've already spoken to in terms of the pandemic. But you know, there's no dithering on these matters. We have the structures in place, as my response details. We're discussing them in great detail. There will have to be a consultation on legislation, as there should be, and we want the public and staff associations and everybody else to engage in that. But then, you know, without undue delay, I would like that legislation to come forward. But it is important we do this right and not rushed.
Okay, thanks very much, Cabinet Secretary. That's helpful. You've also touched on the issue of the complexity, the number of relationships that are there. And you've told us PERC have updated their website to make it more accessible. Is there any particular recommendations within the report that you think will lead to the system becoming more understandable for the general public?
Well, I do think what I spoke about previously around the websites is important, because that is generally how most of the public get their information. Is the age we live in. I think most people will take that route. So I do think actually updating the website in a very easy to read format is going to be important. A number of other recommendations are made by Damielish around, for example, the letters of rights, and I think it's important for those people who may interact with policing to know their rights. So yeah, no, I think the recommendations that Dame Eilish makes both in her preliminary report and her final report around where the interactions with the public happen, where we can move on those quickly, and they don't require legislation, for me they should be done with pace.
Thank you. I agree with you fully on that. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Our next series of questions come from Fulton McGregor. Fulton, please.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary and to your officials. I wanted to ask you about the statutory code of ethics for policing, and I know that you've stated that positive consideration will be given to the specific recommendation that the code could be underpinned in statute. Can you tell us if you think this will be quite a straightforward proposal to implement, or if there'll be any difficulties with that?
So I think on first reading it does sound like quite a simple proposal, but because it requires changes in legislation, obviously there's a process around this, which I've just spoken to. You know, several of the recommendations are quite similar. They may look straightforward, but we have to just carefully assess the impacts and any dependencies and potential unintended consequences. Policing in Scotland, as you know, is obviously underpinned by statute, which is essential to the independence and efficacy, but it does mean that changes of this, like this, you know, shouldn't be made in necessarily isolation. But look, I'm generally very positive about that. I think it's an important recommendation from Dame Eilish, and as I say, I'm positive about the recommendation. I just want to understand it with partners in greater detail if I can.
Thanks to the Cabinet. Thanks for the clarity on that, Cabinet Secretary. A further question is, with regards to serious incidents involving the police, you've agreed that a statutory duty should be brought forward in relation to police officers assisting during investigations, inquiry and formal proceedings. Are you able to elaborate on what that duty will entail, and given the gravity of such incidents, should that duty be introduced at the earliest opportunity?
Yeah, again, I think this is one that is exceptionally important, hence why we've agreed with the recommendations around it. But it would require, again, primary legislation and therefore consultation, and just careful thought to the detail of any statutory requirement. So I'm expecting that I'll hear probably quite different and wide-ranging views about how useful and proportionate it would be to introduce a statutory requirement. You know, again, staff associations will be exceptionally crucial to this recommendation, and they themselves will suggest that there will be some pros and cons. Without speaking for any of those staff associations, they will tell you that there could be pros and cons around taking that route. So I do think that there will be wide agreement about the expectation of officers to assist, but the detail of exactly how we do that will be subject to discussion. But as I say, I'm very positive about that, because I suppose in some respects, how could you not be? It's so important to have that cooperation and assistance from police officers during investigations, inquiries, and indeed, as you say, formal proceedings. So again, I'm positive about it. I just would like to take some time to be able to speak to staff associations and others about any of the adverse unintended consequences.
Thanks for that, Cabinet Secretary. One final, Convener, if I may, in the same area. Dame Eilish has recommended that where the terms of a complaint made, excuse me, where the terms of a complaint made allege a breach of Article 3 by a police officer, and therefore that a crime may have been committed, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service should instruct the PIRC to carry out an independent investigation rather than directing Police Scotland to investigate it. How easy do you think it is to implement this recommendation, and have you got any ideas of how you would propose to do that? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I agree with the thrust of your question, in that, you know, obviously Article 2 and Article 3 allegations or breaches of those articles, or allegations of breaches of those articles, are very, very serious. We're talking about the right to life here, or you know, prohibition from degrading treatment and torture and so on, and inhumane treatment. So, you know, these are the most serious allegations somebody could make. What I should say, and of course our response makes this clear, is this is very firmly a matter for the Lord Advocate. So I should be in some regards careful that I don't step into his remit. He obviously is the head of the system of prosecutions. So it would be for Lord Advocate to answer that, but there should absolutely be, and there will be, very careful consideration to how we do that. There are significant organisational and resource implications, as well as important questions of rights to weigh up. So there will be, you know, we acknowledge for PIRC there will be resourcing implications if they were to do that. In fact, a number of the recommendations mean that there will be a resourcing implication. So as part of the reason why we've increased the funding to PIRC for 21-22, obviously that's subject still to parliamentary approval, but that will allow the PIRC to increase the staff resources to be able to undertake independent investigations and complaints which may allege a breach of Article 3 and indeed Article 5 cases by police officers. So as I say, positive about that, but I'm just a little bit reticent to get into the detail of it because it's firmly in the Lord Advocate's space.
Okay, understandable response, Cabinet Secretary. Thanks very much for the detail there. That's me, Convener.
Thank you. For our next series of questions are from Rhoda Grant. Rhoda, please.
Thanks, Convener. Can I turn to deaths in custody? And Eilish's report recommended that cases should be dealt with in the same timescale and with the same urgency as homicide investigations. And can I ask if you agree with this, and what steps need to be taken to ensure that happens?
Yes, is the short answer. I agree in principle, of course, that absolutely a death in custody should not differ in priority or treated any differently to if that death occurred outside of a custodial setting. So, you know, in short, I agree. You will, of course, understand that these are primarily matters for the PIRC under the direction of the Crown. We do welcome the priority that's been placed on these investigations. They recognise that the PIRC, they work to quite, I suppose, robust internal targets. 80% of investigations reports to be reported to the Crown have to be done within 3 months for such cases. As we set out in our joint response, there's a clear commitment and willingness on all sides to minimise delays, but also I hope there is a recognition that these cases can often be quite complex and sometimes require additional expert input. I did notice that Dame Eilish, she doesn't call for any timescales to be put in statute in her recommendation, but of course we'll continue to support the work of the PIRC and partners to continue to prioritise these serious investigations. But I agree with Rhoda Grant's premise that such deaths should not be treated any differently to homicide investigations that took place outside of a custodial setting.
Can I just push you a little on that? What steps do you think need to be taken to make sure that happens? Because it doesn't happen currently.
Well, I suppose just going back to the timescales that I referenced, the internal targets, those are pretty challenging targets for PERC to work towards. I think what also has to happen, some of this, I don't want to preempt, I should say, anything that would come out of the Sheiko Bio inquiry, the independent inquiry being taken forward by Lord Brackadale. But I do think, regardless of that inquiry, there has been progress that has been made in this respect. So for me, the internal targets are important. I think the close working between the PERC, of course, the Crown and Police Scotland in this regard are important. But for me, there has been a step change and there has been a priority put on those deaths that do happen in custody in a way that I think we have been, or the Crown and others have been criticised for not progressing those as quickly as possible in the past.
Okay, so there's nothing concrete at the moment, no changes that you would recommend that would make the difference?
Well, there's recommendations, for example, you've referenced the recommendation, would be recommendation, just I'll get it right, 73 from Dame Eilish Angelini. So that, for example, those recommendations that Dame Eilish makes, we will give full consideration. Not only full consideration, I think we said in our response, we're very positive about those recommendations that we'll take forward. So progress is being made. But what I would say is it hasn't waited until Dame Eilish's report. The Crown and PERC have themselves put forward very robust internal targets to make sure that such deaths are prioritised.
Okay, can I then just turn to something you touched on earlier, which was legal support and financial support to families when they are having to go through a fatal accident inquiry. Now, you said that there is a legal aid bill up and coming, and that could possibly hold the key to providing that kind of support. Is that what you believe should happen? And would that take into account the length of time a fatal accident inquiry is likely to take place, as legal aid is means tested? Would it require a different type of means testing to take into account that even those with a reasonable income might find it absolutely unaffordable to have legal representation for the whole of the inquiry?
Yeah, so you're right, of course, to indicate that, and these are again matters for the Crown, but you'd be right to indicate that there have been, of course, delays to fatal accident inquiries, which have caused distress, we know, to families. But the period of the fatal accident inquiry itself doesn't often, once it has perhaps begun, a number of them won't take as long as perhaps some of the fatal accident inquiries we have in mind that have unfortunately taken themselves months or years. But what I would say to Rhoda Grant is I'm very positive about that recommendation, because I've met with a number of families that have gone through the FAI process who again have told me that they feel that they have not been able to represent their views adequately due to the system and how it's currently structured in relation to legal aid or indeed financial support for families. So I'm very positive about that. I think it should be done. What I would say is, because of the issues that Rhoda Grant herself has raised, very important issues that Rhoda Grant has raised, obviously we would do a consultation with this bill. So it's a legal aid bill that the Minister for Community Safety, Ash Denham, has assured Parliament that they will be planning for. This will be part of the consultation for that bill, and that means that we may be able to bring that change through quicker than legislative change in relation to the review's recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Have you concluded, Rhoda?
Yes, thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Our next series of questions come from Shona Robertson. Shona, please.
Thank you, Convener. Can I start, Cabinet Secretary, by touching on an issue in your response? You state that the need to clarify the definition of a person serving with the police in legislation as recommended by Dame Eilish, and you describe that as being of fundamental importance and that it will feature strongly in consultation and engagement with partners and stakeholders on future legislative amendments. Can you say a little bit more about why you think that's so important, and whether, given its importance, is that going to be could that be a legislative amendment sooner rather than later? What's the sort of time frame that you're considering for that? Thank you.
Yeah, and again, I am positive about the change in itself, but again, it probably falls into that bracket that it may look quite simple on the face of it, but actually there's a fair degree of complexity, and it's quite possible, although we're getting clarification of this, but it's quite possible it may also require changes to reserve legislation as much as it may require change to devolved legislation as well. So I think the reasons why Dame Eilish has suggested it are absolutely sound, and I think nobody can really argue with that. We know that investigations, there's a potential for investigations to be disrupted due to officers leaving the service, and we've got to address that in a way that's sensible and proportionate. So I'm very positive about it. I don't think it could be done out with a kind of primary legislation. But again, we're exploring these matters as you'd expect through the ministerial group and also the strategic oversight group as well. But I don't think there would be a way of doing it through, say, secondary legislation or a legislative amendment as such. I think it would have to go through it would require legislative change that would be we need to take the necessary time to do that. And as I said, possibly even legislation.
Okay, thanks for that. Just moving on to the issue of the park. As things stand at the moment, the park doesn't have the power to investigate incidents involving officers from other territorial forces operating in Scotland, and Dame Eilish has recommended that the Scottish Government should agree with the UK Government and the Northern Ireland Executive how to best amend primary legislation to give the park such a power. Is this another example of where the appropriate legislation solution should be sought at the earliest opportunity, and are you intending to begin those discussions?
So again, it would be for the park to obviously take forward those discussions, and in the absence of legislation, having spoken to partners, I know they've taken a very collaborative approach, and they've pulled together a draft agreement setting out the key principles of, with actions for relevant organisations to support, as I say, a collaborative approach until any new legislation can be put in place. So I know that kind of joint working or discussions are very much happening in the absence of legislation. In terms of legislation, we're committed to developing legislative proposals to address this, but they'll obviously, again, be subject to consultation, but also for this particular recommendation, with counterparts in other jurisdictions, we'd be keen to seek their views as well. So I suppose, kind of, again, to cut to the chase, it won't necessarily just require legislation for there not to be progress. There will be progress. There's already been progress in this matter. Where we can do that through, or the park can do that through draft agreements or memorandum of understanding, that's being pursued.
Okay, I mean, presumably, just finally from me, the recommendations with regard to widening the powers of the park would require legislation, I'm assuming, and can you say a little bit more about the substance of those new powers beyond what you've said already in this session, and how you intend to give effect to these recommendations? Is it through the primary legislation the bill that you talked about earlier on in the session?
Yes, again, in short, all the new powers that are recommended will require legislation in relation to the park. I did welcome in our response the fact that the park have the skills and strength. I think it's a real testament to the Commissioner and the vigour that she's brought to the role in terms of their additional powers. and while we absolutely recognise and accept the intention behind the proposed new powers, they will require further discussion and consultation with partners. For example, the various recommendations around misconduct and taking over the preliminary assessment process from the SPA. It's really got to be essential that the staff association views are also sought in these discussions to discuss how they'd work in practice. There's a number of recommendations around the powers, which I could talk to, but again, just by way of example, that some of them will require discussions with the UK government. So if I was to take the final report, recommendation 20, which is around being a prescribed body for whistleblowing, PERC are working their way through that, but I'm working through what the implications may be. But this will require discussions potentially with the UK government as well. So we will move as quickly as we possibly can to understand the impacts and effects of these recommendations. But as I said to Margaret Mitchell, the broad message from the government and the joint response from myself and the Crown is that we absolutely agree that the powers of the PERC need to be beefed up, and where necessary, they need to be able to have greater staff resource, and indeed, if it comes to a difference in their structure, as is being suggested by Dame Eilish, which again I'm favourable to, then we've got to just understand fully the implications of that.
Okay. Thanks, Convener. That's all from me.
Thank you, Shona. Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you about the views of rank and file officers, please? Police are in a very privileged position. They can deprive someone of their liberty. They can legitimately use force. And this is a complicated area that we've been discussing rights, a whole series of rights at play and competing rights. There will be a concern that's sometimes voiced that once again this is remote people, remote from the front line, pontificating about very important issues. Can you give a categoric assurance that the individual human rights of any serving police officer will not be eroded by anything that's decided at the end of this process, please?
Well, I think it's a very good question. Exactly the reasons why, for particularly those changes that will then be underpinned in statute, that there should be and must be a consultation, not just a public consultation, of course there should be that too, but there should be discussions and consultation with staff associations to understand what the impacts may be. And it's why, without rushing into this, and there's some individuals, even some parliamentarians, who tell us to rush into the recommendations, but actually we should really understand the implications from a human rights perspective, because we are talking about, we're talking about somebody's livelihood when an allegation, a serious allegation, is made of misconduct, potentially gross misconduct, particularly if they reference Articles 2 or 3, maybe Article 5. I mean, these are really, really serious allegations, and there has to be a due process. So we've just got to work through that. So again, long and short of the answer is, I think it's an excellent question. It's one that we are very aware of, and it's why we want to have the broadest consultation with the rank and file and those bodies that represent the rank and file.
Okay, thank you for that, Cabinet Secretary. Margaret Mitchell has a further question. Margaret, please.
Thank you, Convener. Cabinet Secretary, can I clarify your response regarding the publication of progress against recommendations? Can you confirm, in the interest of transparency and accountability, that the Scottish Government will list all the recommendations on its website for the public to see, and that alongside each recommendation it will state if the Scottish Government accepts or rejects the recommendation, and if so, why? And that the tracker will show which agency was responsible for delivering that recommendation and at what stage they are at with the recommendation.
So again, in short, yes, I can guarantee that all that information would be part of a progress report. What I wouldn't suggest that we would do is have all of the recommendations with a very binary tick box, whether it's completed or not completed. And I accept that's not what Margaret Mitchell is asking me. I think what Margaret Mitchell is asking is for a nuanced picture of whether or not a recommendation has been accepted. Has it not been accepted? And I've committed, even if something is not accepted, we will give the reasons and rationale why. She's asking what partners are responsible. I think that's reasonable. And she's asking about where progress is. And I think that's absolutely, again, reasonable. So for where for example, there is legislation required, as I've already mentioned, there will have to be consultation. There will then be a consultation analysis, drafting of a legislation, introduction of that legislation, parliamentary scrutiny. So it'd be helpful to be able to give detail of that in any, you call it an action tracker, but any progress report in terms of what stage various recommendations are at. So again, in short, all of the information there that Margaret Mitchell has asked for absolutely should be part and will be part of any progress report.
I just wanted to make sure that that will be published on the Scottish Government website, and ask this Cabinet Secretary, because you'll be aware the Justice Committee looked at complaints, realised it was a huge issue when we did our post-legislative scrutiny of the police and fire legislation, and that from that Dame Eilish was asked to conduct this independent inquiry. That was 2018. We're now in 2021. Last November, there was no ministerial statement to emphasise how important and urgent these recommendations being implemented is. And so I want to be absolutely clear that this doesn't go into the long grass, and that the Scottish Government website will reflect all the recommendations, the progress, whether they're being implemented, and if there are reasons like it needs further legislation or it needs secondary legislation, that will be apparent, Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, again, if we didn't publish it on the website, I'm not sure where else we'd bother publishing it. So yes, it should be published. It will be published on the Scottish Government website, on I would hope the partners' websites as well that we've spoken to. I don't want to keep harking back to ministerial statement, but I'm not sure after the preliminary report there was a request for a ministerial statement made at Bureau. If there was by partners, forgive me, I would have been more than happy to have made one. My understanding back in 2019 was I was to appear in front of committee as I'm doing today and answer questions. And I should say, without any hesitation on the record, that if members of the opposition would like a ministerial statement in the future on any aspect of the Dame Eilish report or in its entirety, I will make myself available to the Chamber to do that at any time that we can fit that into the parliamentary timetable.
I can clarify that for you, Cabinet Secretary. Not an interim statement requiring a ministerial statement, but certainly the final report, it was surprising and disappointing that there wasn't immediately a ministerial statement. But I think we've covered all of this, Convener, and I'm happy to leave it there.
Thank you. I believe you did cover it extensively, Margaret. Yes, thank you very much indeed. Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you, and again it's on the issue of transparency and accessibility. Dame Eilish made 8 recommendations which relate to that. And your response note that there's an agreement with partners to make improvements to deliver on the intent of them all. Excuse me. Can you elaborate on the work that's already been undertaken in this area and what still requires to be done to give full effect to the relevant recommendations? And I wonder, should there be wider engagement beyond justice partners to ensure that people are fully aware of how to make a complaint? For instance, for example, suggested Scottish Women's Aid and Victim Support Scotland. If you could comment on that, please.
I think on your latter point, that's almost absolutely inevitably got to be done, and I think it should be done. I think broader engagement. It's why, again, where there's legislation required, there absolutely should be consultation, but we shouldn't just leave that to the recommendations for where there's legislative requirements. So I should say, I mean, I've spoken to more than just the partners that I've referenced in terms of policing about the review, and it's been raised by others proactively. But yes, no, a wider piece of engagement with victims' organisations should absolutely be essential. I think it's an important point that you've raised there. You know, the partners, Park, the Crown, Police Scotland, SPA, they have committed to working to better publicise the ability to report a complaint of a crime by a police officer directly to CAT-D, as it's known, the Criminal Allegations Against Police Division. While it will be obviously for the partners to consider how to strengthen that wider engagement, I will certainly raise that with the various partners when I speak to them in the next conversation I have, because I do think it's really, really important that this is not just a kind of policing conversation happening between the policing family, for want of a better phrase.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Cabinet Secretary. That completes our questions and concludes our evidence session. So I'd like to thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for your full and frank evidence, for your officials for attending and providing evidence to the subcommittee today. And that concludes the public part of today's meeting. The next meeting of the subcommittee will be on Monday, the 1st March, when we'll take evidence from Police Scotland on the impact of Brexit on policing in Scotland. In the meantime, any follow-up scrutiny issues will be dealt with by correspondence, which as ever will be published on our website. And as previously agreed, I will now move the meeting into private session. Thank you. Thank you to colleagues in broadcast.